Gus Blue had awoken to see two familiar faces. The face of his crush, Cynthia, and her uncle Abe. It felt different than it normally would. On a normal day, Gus would feel smitten and awkward as his muscles tightened. But this time was different. Instead, Gus felt overly confident and risky. Perhaps the messages that the Novus Ordo Seclorum were trying to give to Gus had been realized by him. Gus had decided that now was the time to shoot his shot. After all, he had never felt better. Now with his enlightenment, he knew that the Novus Ordo Seclorum was good. But was it really? What Gus didn't know was that he was being manipulated by the new substance known as wintonium. It changed his perception of everything. Hey, 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 Gus exclaimed. How have you two been? Not good at all, Abe replied with a frown. We've been starved of food, sunlight, and most importantly, our friends, Cynthia told Gus. Yeah, we need to get the hell out of here. But the thing is that I just don't know how, said Abe. Gus looked at Cynthia and Abe. Gus knew that the Novus Ordo Seclorum was better than that. There was simply no way that they were starved of these necessities. But the thing was that it seemed to Gus that they had both seen better days. Abe and Cynthia were significantly skinnier now. Well, it appears to me that the Novus Ordo Seclorum locked you two fat asses in here to learn a few lessons. They always have good intentions. They are the greatest, and I am God BL, screamed Gus before he was interrupted by a punch in the face by Uncle Abe. Gus fell onto the ground. After the punch, Gus seemed to feel a little off. He was traumatized. The Novus Ordo Seclorum did something to him, but his mind was fuzzy. He remembered being strapped onto a seat and being manipulated, but only slight bits. The punch had messed up the control on Gus's mind. He saw Abe and Cynthia again. But this time, he agreed with their idea. He needed to get out of this cell. He needed to escape the Novus Ordo Seclorum and go back home. There, his brother would be there. He thought about his brother. Vinny was probably terrified by the fact that his younger brother was missing. Gus, are you okay? Cynthia asked. Yeah, Gus said, slightly disoriented. I'm fine. If you're fine, then explain why you said that, asked Abe, grabbing Gus's shirt. The guy that did that wasn't me. I was manipulated by them. They wanted me to be loyal to them. The Novus Ordo Seclorum deserves to die, Gus exclaimed. Abe chuckled. Good. Now let's get the hell out of here. Gus had an idea on how they were going to get out. He told him the plan. After all, it seemed ingenious. When Cynthia and Abe went to bed, Gus was going to request to leave the cell. When he left the cell, he was going to find a pair of keys, then he was going to go back inside the cell. In the middle of the day, they were going to break free. Gus remembered a large entryway into the facility. It was a large door near a storage room. They were going to escape that way. Gus would stay and let Cynthia and Abe leave unnoticed. Cynthia and Abe were both on board with the plan. They seemed desperate to get out of the cell. Even Gus was desperate. His mind was now clearer and he remembered everything. He was tranquilized by VB, where he was then forced onto a seat. There, wintonium was forced into Gus's system. They intentionally controlled his mind. It was even worse than manipulation. It enraged Gus. But it made him think. Perhaps Toby wasn't as bad as he once thought. After all, Toby was perceived as an evil monster that betrayed the Novus or dosa chlorum. But the truth was likely different. It was both enraging, but also a revelation. When the time comes, I'll wake you guys up, Gus told them reassuringly. Cynthia and Abe nodded and went to sleep. Gus called the guards to let him out, telling them that he wanted to just enjoy some leisure time. I don't want to be back into that savage cell ever again, Gus exclaimed. You can tell them that I ran away, and they will never have to worry about me ever again. The guard agreed. I cannot let you do that. Orders are orders and you need to be back in the cell as soon as possible. Gus scoffed. Fine asshole, he exclaimed to the guard. The guard walked away, giving Gus ample time to sneak into a locker room. The locker room had the keys to the cell. He grabbed the keys and looked for the keys to the specific cell. Cell number 63. He unhooked the keys and walked back to the cell in the silent dark. It seemed like everything was truly silent, but he did have concerns. There were likely cameras everywhere. But it was unlikely that Gus would be caught by the camera. He looked at a clock. The time was 3:36 a.m. Gus thought that anybody who was awake was likely either drunk or was so tired they might as well be. He returned to the cell to see Cynthia and Uncle Abe both asleep. In order to stay in character, Gus mocked Cynthia and Abe before sliding the key into the cell. He then yelled at a guard. Why yes sir, the guard said, startled. Get me back into the cell you peasant. And don't you stutter ever again, Gus shouted at the guard. Annoyed, the guard reluctantly opened the cell door and shoved Gus Blue back in. I did the deed, now go to bed, the guard said to Gus. Gus stayed awake for a while, however he eventually did succumb to tiredness, causing him to promptly fall asleep. Gus woke up to see the sight of Cynthia and Uncle Abe. Both looked confident. Confident that the plan was going to work. Because after all, they were fighting for their freedom. What about you Gus? Uncle Abe asked Gus. Me, Gus replied. I'm coming with you guys. I'm going to get the hell out of here. And when I finally break free, the entire building will be littered with cops. It's the only way to be sure that they can never ever get us back. Uncle Abe nodded. Most certainly. Worst comes to worst, I can get some of my friends to kill these fucking fascists. All of them, Uncle Abe said. Gus nodded. Shortly after, Gus had grabbed the key and unlocked the door. They were ready to break free. Gus opened the door quietly. Cynthia and Abe followed suit. What Gus didn't expect was the sight of a guard. What the guard said before Uncle Abe directly charged at the guy. Abe pummeled the man before he was able to pull out his taser. He grabbed the guard's handgun and walked away. Abe then proceeded to shoot the security cameras so that no other guards would come. Uncle Abe dragged the body and walked away. The three of them walked away from the body and proceeded deeper into the facility. At one moment, Gus saw a sign that pointed to an exit. The exit was a long tunnel that was only able to fit a few people. Gus started to run, but Abe grabbed his shirt. There were 3 guys guarding the exit. Hide, Gus said. I got this. Gus then walked up to the guards. He requested to leave the facility. Did you get permission to leave? One of the guards asked. Yes, Mr. Dominus told me that I could have today off. Huh, even though there is an important meeting that you should be attending. The guard asked again. Look, just let me leave. Gus yelled at the guard. I cannot let you go unless you are permitted to leave. Well, just tell them. That I am getting a breath of fresh air. I have been stuck with this bullshit. I need to see the sun. Gus begged the man. The guard sent a request to Mr. Dominus. Mr. Dominus told the guard that Gus should still be in his cell, just in case Toby were to return. You are going back to your cell, young man. You need to stay there until Toby arrives. No. This is bullshit. Go. Gus screamed. Cynthia and Abe heard him screaming and began to run towards the guards. Uncle Abe killed all 3 of the guards in cold blood. But a guard was able to call reinforcements. They began sprinting down the tunnel. Pretty soon, guards were chasing him, and they were catching up. Gus thought about what would happen after. He could live a normal life again. His brother would be waiting for him. He would live an American dream. With the money that he made, Gus would be able to live a life of prosperity. He wanted that life so much that it drove him to keep going. Cynthia and Abe got to the tunnel first, and they began running to a nearby highway. They had gotten home scot-free. However, Gus wasn't so lucky. A guard had caught up to him and yanked him back. He fell backwards on the ground. No! Cynthia yelled. Abe began running back, but Gus told him, "Leave me behind. I'll find a way out on my own. Save yourself," he yelled. But in truth, Gus didn't know how he would get out. The Novus Ordo Seclorum would most likely discover that he wasn't being manipulated by them anymore. They would most likely manipulate his mind once again. He would be their slave again. All of this for nothing. He took one last look at Cynthia. There he realized that he did it for something. He had freed his crush and her uncle. They could now thrive. Because of him. He had felt something. It was a slimmer of hope. It was odd to Gus. After all, he hadn't felt it in a while. But he felt it once again, even if it was for the last time. It quickly diminished when Gus realized that they may not be free. Even if they were free, that could have been the last time Gus would ever see her again. After all, it likely was going to be the last time. Gus was dragged away. He could no longer see the beautiful face of his crush or the sunlight. He shed a tear. He eventually saw a man in a doctor's uniform. He felt familiar, but he didn't know how exactly. "Hello, Gus," the doctor said. "I am Dr. Ortherschnapp, and it seems that you have a severe case of backstabbing. But don't worry, we will cure you, and you won't feel a single thing." Dr. Ortherschnapp injected a needle into his left arm. Gus felt oddly tired, before promptly falling asleep. Gus awoke to the sight of Alia and Harry Roots in his cell. "Get the fuck up, you broke little bitch," Harry told Gus. "Yeah, Schneider is now the new commissioner of Fero. It's a big day, so I would suggest that you get up and get dressed," Alia said. Gus got up. This time he didn't feel any sort of hatred towards Harry or Alia. Instead, it seemed that they were guiding him to becoming the best. They were guiding him to be the key to everything. The superior man, a god. Gus was no longer Gus. Instead, he was liberated as a human. He was a god. Gus was his own god. And he was ready. Gus put on his clothes and walked out of the room. Outside was a huge crowd of people cheering Gus on. Gus was a superior man now. And it showed. Gus was then taken into a car where he would be dropped off into the downtown area of Fero. It was much smaller than the downtown area of Benko Falls, where the tallest buildings were only about 10 stories. It was much different than the AT&T building in downtown Benko Falls, which was around 50 stories. But Gus did notice that there was a huge crowd of people surrounding a stage. On the stage was Heinrich Schneider. Schneider spoke. "Good afternoon, everybody," he exclaimed. The crowd screamed at him. They were clearly excited. "That's right. I am now the new commissioner of Fero," Schneider screamed at the crowd. "And do you know what I'm going to do?" he asked. "What?" the crowd said. "I am going to make this place great again by kicking the Jewish vermin out," Schneider yelled. "Because we need unity now more than ever. I am calling all Aryans to establish the greatest city in the entire United States." The crowd screamed even louder. And Gus was even pleased. He knew that Schneider would fix everything wrong. But something impulsive came in. Gus didn't know what had happened to Cynthia and Abe. It seemed like he would never know what happened to them, but he had hoped that they were enjoying life. And that the Novus Ordo Seclorum was treating them right. But that was basically a given. But the truth was that Uncle Abe and Cynthia were in hiding, in fear that the Novus Ordo Seclorum would capture and kill them. A couple of guards took Gus back into his cell. They put a gun with him in order to defend himself. Gus did ask the guards a couple of questions. "Why am I still in the cell?" Gus asked. "We need Toby to think that you have been captured so that he can fall right into our little trap." The guard responded. Gus was convinced. But he had another question. "Where is Cynthia and Uncle Abe?" "I don't know, but we will get them back. Just don't you worry," the guard replied.